The lie had barely been exposed when fate struck back without mercy. Just days after Nicole dismantled the false cancer diagnosis that haunted her family, she walked into a routine medical check and walked out carrying a truth far more terrifying than any deception she had uncovered. A tumor. A word heavy enough to silence even her rage. In a cruel twist of irony, the woman who proved death had been fabricated for someone else was now forced to face the possibility that it had chosen her instead. What followed was not relief, not justice, but a brutal reckoning, where truth no longer felt like power, and survival itself became uncertain. Nicole did not walk into the medical center expecting a verdict on her life. The appointment was meant to be procedural, a responsible gesture after weeks of sleepless nights, stress-induced headaches, and the lingering unease that followed her discovery of Anita's falsified diagnosis. She told herself that vigilance was not fear, that control was still within reach. Yet the sterile calm of the examination rooms felt different this time, heavier, as though the walls themselves already knew what she did not. By the time the scans were complete and the tests reviewed, the air around her seemed to thicken, compressing her thoughts into a single unbearable point. A tumor had been found. The word lodged itself in her mind like a foreign object, refusing to dissolve. The possibility of cancer followed immediately, clinical and detached, yet devastating in its implication. In that moment, Nicole understood the cruelty of timing, the way life seemed to mock her relentless pursuit of truth by turning the lens inward, forcing her to confront the very nightmare she had just dismantled for someone else. Shock did not arrive as panic, it arrived as fury. An almost violent anger surged through her, sharp and disorienting, because the symmetry of it all felt obscene. She had just exposed a lie powerful enough to rearrange her family's reality, had torn away the illusion of Anita's illness with precision and resolve, and now she stood accused by her own body. The irony was suffocating. She could not escape the sense that this was a punishment, not in a spiritual sense, but in a cruel psychological one, as though the universe itself were reminding her that truth always demands a price. Her mind raced through every late night, every moment of suppressed stress, every silent compromise she had made in the name of stability. She wondered if the tumor had been growing quietly while she was busy protecting everyone else, if her body had absorbed the cost of her vigilance until it could no longer remain silent. As the implications began to settle, fear crept in behind the anger, insidious and persistent. Nicole had always defined herself by clarity and control, by her ability to see through deception and act decisively. Illness threatened that identity at its core. The possibility of cancer introduced a level of uncertainty she could not negotiate or outmaneuver. There was no strategy that could guarantee survival, no confrontation that could force a confession from a disease. The loss of agency terrified her more than the diagnosis itself. She felt trapped inside a body that had suddenly become unreliable, a vessel capable of betrayal just as profound as any human counterpart. Anita's presence loomed over everything, even in her absence. Nicole could not separate her own diagnosis from the lie that had preceded it. The revelation that Anita was never sick had already destabilized their relationship, introducing resentment and guilt in equal measure. Now, faced with the possibility that she herself might be gravely ill, Nicole grappled with a tangle of emotions she was ashamed to acknowledge. Part of her raged at the injustice, at the thought that Anita would be spared while she might suffer. Another part recoiled from that anger, disgusted by its selfishness, reminding her that survival was not a competition. Yet the resentment persisted, fueled by exhaustion and fear. She questioned whether Anita's ordeal, though fabricated, had drained resources and attention that might have been directed toward her own health sooner. The thought was irrational, cruel, and yet impossible to fully suppress. The broader implications of her diagnosis began to unfold with terrifying clarity. Nicole understood immediately that this was not just a personal crisis, but a destabilizing force within an already volatile family dynamic. Her illness threatened to rewrite power structures, reopen wounds that had barely begun to scab over, and expose vulnerabilities that others would inevitably exploit. The same instincts that had driven her to uncover the truth about Anita now urged her towards secrecy. She weighed the consequences with ruthless logic. Revealing her condition would invite scrutiny, pity, and strategic maneuvering from those who thrived on weakness. Concealing it would isolate her, forcing her to carry the burden alone while maintaining the illusion of strength. Either choice felt like surrender. As days passed, the anger Nicole felt toward her own body hardened into something darker. She blamed it for its timing, its silence, its apparent indifference to her need for stability. She interrogated every sensation, every ache with obsessive intensity, swinging between denial and catastrophic certainty. The waiting became unbearable. Each delay in further testing felt like an accusation, a reminder that her fate was suspended in someone else's hands. In that limbo, her thoughts turned increasingly destructive. She imagined worst-case scenarios, not out of masochism, but out of a desperate need to prepare, to regain some semblance of control over an uncontrollable outcome. Anita, sensing a shift she could not fully explain, experienced her own internal conflict. Having just reclaimed her life from the shadow of a false diagnosis, she was unwilling to confront the possibility that the darkness had simply shifted to someone else. Her relief had been fragile, built on the assumption that the worst was over. Nicole's subtle withdrawal, her sharpened edges and unpredictable mood swings triggered suspicion and fear Anita was not ready to acknowledge. The unspoken tension between them grew heavier, charged with unasked questions and unexpressed dread. Anita's instinct to protect clashed violently with her fear of vulnerability, leaving her paralyzed by inaction. Nicole's anger increasingly sought an external target. She revisited the falsified test results, the manipulated records, the system that had allowed such a profound deception to occur. The possibility that the same network of negligence or malice could now influence her own diagnosis was intolerable. Suspicion bloomed into paranoia. She questioned the integrity of every process, every professional assurance. Trust, once broken, refused to be rebuilt. The thought that her life might depend on the same structures that had betrayed her family ignited a rage so intense it bordered on obsession. She began to see patterns where none existed, connecting her tumor to the earlier scandal in a desperate attempt to impose logic on chaos. The emotional toll manifested in increasingly volatile behavior. Nicole became abrasive, dismissive, pushing people away before they could offer sympathy she did not want or questions she could not answer. Her anger was indiscriminate, lashing out at allies and adversaries alike. Beneath it all was a terror she could not articulate, the fear of becoming powerless, of being reduced to a diagnosis rather than a force to be reckoned with. She feared that illness would strip her of relevance, that her voice would be softened by concern, her authority undermined by mortality. The thought was unbearable. As the possibility of cancer loomed larger, Nicole was forced to confront the most devastating decision of all, whether to fight publicly or privately. Public acknowledgement could rally support, but would expose her to manipulation and scrutiny at her most vulnerable. Privacy would preserve her autonomy, but at the cost of isolation and mistrust. The decision weighed heavily, compounded by the knowledge that any delay in treatment carried its own risks. She found herself trapped between instinct and reason, between the desire to remain in control and the necessity of surrendering it. In the end, what defined this moment was not the diagnosis itself, but the collision of truth and vulnerability. Nicole had built her identity on the belief that uncovering truth was a form of power, that exposure equaled control. Now she faced a reality where truth offered no leverage, only uncertainty. The tumor represented everything she could not confront or outmaneuver, a reminder that some battles cannot be won through intellect or resolve alone. As anger, fear, and determination warred within her, one truth became unavoidable. The fight ahead would demand more than strength. It would require her to confront the limits of her own power, and in doing so, risk becoming someone she no longer recognized. What remains in the wake of the diagnosis is not clarity, but a fracture running through everything Nicole once believed about control, justice, and strength. The tumor does not offer answers or closure. It demands patience from a woman who has built her life on urgency and action. Every path forward feels compromised, every choice weighted with consequences that extend far beyond her own body. Anger still burns, but it no longer points outward. It circles inward, colliding with fear, pride, and the terrifying possibility of dependence. Nicole understands now that uncovering the truth did not make her invincible. It exposed how vulnerable she has always been beneath the armor of certainty. As the future narrows into test results, timelines, and probabilities, she stands at the edge of a battle she cannot fully command, forced to reckon with the most unsettling truth of all, that survival is not something she can control, only confront.